Hey, Shivan. Welcome.
Hi, Donnie. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. Lovely to have you. So, you're a biological scientist, right?
Yes, sir, indeed.
So, what exactly does that mean? I mean, I understand what biology is, and I have some idea what science is meant to be, but how does that different from a microbiologist, or where does it fit in the whole picture?
I think they all fall under the theme of life sciences in one way or the other. So life sciences and biological sciences deals with most of anything that has cells, DNA, and protein to do with it, as compared to the physical world of geology, rocks, and the mechanical world of things that we make.
Okay, so yeah, so life sciences, so it's biological science, something that's alive, that has cells, that has.
Or that was previously alive. So there's a massive amount of paleobiology and biology as a science has existed from the time we started getting those primordial soup reactions and started getting our base pairs and these types of things together. And then the evolutionary spectrum after that, and where we ended up now, and we exist in this complex and ever-changing web of biology.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of people speak about it. I've read a couple of things, and I find myself just being, on the one hand, a little bit confused because there are lots of things I don't understand. Uh, at the same time, absolutely amazed the thought. But it's also, I know I'm a bit of a dumbass when it comes to trying to understand times like this. If you say, I think planet's supposed to be about 4.5 billion years old, give or take. It took
Yep.
a billion years for the first bacteria, pre-bacteria.
Yep.
Organisms.
It took a long time, and then a long time after that to get to any type of plants and animals, and a very long time after that for us to appear. And even till today, we're not sure as a species if we are going to outstrip any of the other primary apex predators that have dominated the planet, because our window for dominance has been so low or so short, to say that, where something like dinosaurs and pre-dinosaurs had a much longer term of dominance. So we're just at the starting of our actual human being dominance phase, and whether or not we can outstrip any of those other species that existed, that's a major biological question that many people are interested in.
Yeah. So I know the human date keeps on getting pushed back. Was it 150,000? Is it 200, 400,000? Is it maybe 800,000 years modern human beings have been around? Maybe it's a million, but compared to the 65 million years.
In those types of time frames, and yeah. So no, it's interesting how far we actually do manage to go. If we can reach even 2 million years or 3 million years, and that would be a major civilization milestone.
Yeah, we've got a little bit to go there, right?
Mm.
You reckon we'll destroy ourselves before we get there?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's lots of threats out there. I mean, you talk about biological science from the past. You have things like the permafrost and the ice caps melting, and what that can release is archaic bacteria, archaic viruses, things that we not familiar with. On the converse, what that might also release is molecular signatures, patterns that can lead to improved biological tools, improved therapeutics, and improved medicines from the new DNA that you find there. So it's a new age of biological discovery in that angle, as tools develop to help us determine what these DNA sequences are and what is this biological net we're interacting in. More tools become available, more products become available to benefit us either through process or through.
So is this, at this point, still kind of hypothetical, or are there actual things that have come or have been extracted from the permafrost where there is some kind of DNA sequence or something that's been used as a therapeutic, or at least being studied as a potential therapeutic?
I think it's a continuous process, and I think from being able to find the base pairs initially with Watson and Crick or whoever you believe came up with those types of models. From then, it's been an age of biological discovery, what people do by exploration everywhere from the deserts to the oceans to, even looking at what molecular signatures you could find coming from asteroids, what different DNA could come from that. Our base pairs are quite determined, but we don't rule out that there might be other base pairs in the foreseeable universe. And we're also starting to make synthetic base pairs, which is quite interesting for protein engineering.
Okay, so this all sounds really cool, and I've heard base pairs being thrown around, and try not to look like the stupidest guy in the room by not knowing what exactly is a base pair.
Essentially similar to how you have ones and zeros with coding. That's your genetic code from those 4 base pairs. And they code for every type of molecule that your body will produce, both structural, functional, organizational, and that is your gene expression, which each cell would control.
So our base pairs are similar to like what living creatures on the planet, and which living creatures don't have the same, or we all have the same base pairs.
Yeah, I'd say like all our mammals, all our reptiles, they would have.
Jellyfish.
Jellyfish, I'm not an expert on jellyfish DNA, but yeah, where would jellyfish go on? Potentially, if they divide. But we're looking more at our more evolved mammals and what's conserved. So, like for example, with between chimpanzees and humans, there's about 5% genetic variation. Between different strains of HIV, for example, there's 10% genetic variation. So you have a lot of conserved homology sequences. And if you map our genome against different genomes, you'll see regions that are conserved through the evolutionary tree.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's linear. Thanks. Currently, what are you busy with? Is this something sort of on the animal side?
I think we're busy with something called One Health. One Health is a philosophy that we don't exist in our medical sphere on our own. We exist with the animals, with the bacteria, with the plants, with the viruses. And if you start getting your veterinary side of things dipping, there's a chance of viruses, bacteria, pathogens jumping from those animals to humans. So we exist in this interwoven web of complex biology with these different things, and that's what One Health is about. Similar to climate change, if you're undergoing climate change on the planet, how is this climate affecting different diseases in different parts of the world? If it's getting warmer in areas, would you didn't have previously malaria, and are you going to start getting malaria pushing up into those areas? These are the sort of concepts around One Health, and I think we only in the last 10 years starting to push past the barrier that, we are human beings, we exist on our own, and maybe COVID was a good example. Here in Africa, it's interesting because, you're synonymous with disease. Infectious disease is something that we used to. With COVID, the West wasn't used to getting infectious disease. Things like lifestyle diseases, cancer, diabetes, that would be your major killers there. For first time in a long time, you're getting infectious disease pushing into relatively safe environments, which causes for alarm.
Okay. So I recall hearing at some point that overfishing and unsustainable fishing practices can actually lead to these imbalances in the ocean, and you end up with sort of bloom of, back to the jellyfish, sort of jellyfish becoming super abundant and then changing the whole balance of the ocean. And I suppose that same kind of thing can happen when sort of intensively farming a specific species and working out genetic variants, and that there's some kind of price to pay because there's this incredible complexity that's allowed us to develop in all our glory on this tiny little sliver of an atmosphere at the top of a tiny little planet, right?
Yeah.
And so what are you specifically looking at the moment?
Well, I think it's what mainly service delivery, mainly looking at for healthcare, even if we make the best medicines, are they accessible? Can they reach, the types of populations that require them? If we have, one of the lessons, if we use COVID as a recent pandemic, the lessons that we learn from that is, even if we are manufacturing vaccines, the vaccines still have to go on cold chain. They have to reach long distances and, get to the terminal areas on cold chain. So one of the things I'm interested in is what is the ethical distance that people need to be away from their primary healthcare facility. For example, a clinic or a vaccination station, or that's something of interest. And the other thing is also food delivery and food security, and ensuring that people in your terminal regions have enough protein to survive to even get medication. Because if people aren't eating, there's no point worrying about disease. They have to be able to eat and have enough nutrition for us to be biological strong. so that medicine can work and they can actually be able to take themselves from where they live to a clinic. So those are the Maslow's sort of interest in science at the moment.
Yeah. So I can understand you saying the cold chain, and I know with mRNA vaccines that they the cold chain needed to be preserved because they have to be cold, and I have some other opinions about some of that, but might go into that later. In terms of providing food, sort of talking about, let's service the last mile problem of getting high enough protein to people in desolate places and so on. Are there specific places that you're looking at, specific um, ways of producing food that maybe don't need that much of a cold chain, that be easier for it to get closer to people?
Yes, it's not necessarily about like cold chain. So at the moment, if you look at with a sort of like protein science background, we know that the humans cannot produce certain amino acids, meaning these essential amino acids we have to raise from consumption, and that consumption needs to come from either high protein plants or animals. At the moment, we rely on animals as a baseline for our protein supply. This includes things like fish meal and soy meal, and that's somewhat environmentally detrimental. So I think there's a multiple angle push globally to find alternative protein sources than these. So we don't cut down rainforest and scrape the ocean and create that type of legacy going forward. But with the biological processes, there's been a lot of innovation and things like different technologies, different bioprocesses. So I don't think it's something that's going to have a terminal end in the next 50 years or be one solution that fixes that. I think it's going to be a thought shift that we've had, that we are doing more sustainable protein. We are doing less harmful things to the environment to get that protein.
In terms of this one life approach, it makes sense because I know there's this idea about, say, generic organic farming, where they say it's organic, but then they say the eggs are supposed to be organic, but the regulation says the chicken has to be able to see the sky. So you give them a solarium and you go, there you go, they're organic, sitting in a battery or whatever. But to sort of really get to fully sustainable farming is more than just feel nice about it, kind of vaguely environmental thing. It's actually for the survival of our general ecology, which directly feeds into our well-being and our ability to not just be sort of healthy and thrive and as is that specifically what you were saying, to actually want to avoid pathogens and so on developing that wouldn't have, if we weren't messing around with the precarious balances of the complexity of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think we reached a point. I mean, just before COVID, our median population age had increased. For the first time, we had more old people than young people on the planet in our entire history. And that was pre-COVID, and COVID was a disease that was largely targeting older people, and was largely mortality rates, and that were largely older people. So these balances.
So it brought down that number a little bit, but it may have skewed our understanding of what is still a trend on the planet.
Yeah, and it's a trend that we are quite expansive on the planet, that we are continuously growing, we're producing more waste, and we don't know where to cap that off. So sustainability is about recognizing that we can grow. And birth rates are declining in some economies as things get more expensive. People cannot afford children, so that's one factor that's coming into play. So would we plateau at some level? I don't know, but we have to plan for increased population. Either way.
Yeah, I find it fascinating to. I grew up with this idea, and I think it was sort of readily being thrown around that, and now it's called Malthusian idea. I suppose that's what it originally is. This idea that we're going to be too many people. I remember my mom was quite claustrophobic, and she was always concerned that because they told her back in whenever she was a kid that by the year 2000, every human being on the planet would only have 1 square meter. And to her, the thoughts of everyone being squeezed in, like, it was just too much. And that claustrophobia sort of kicked in. and now we seem to have exactly the opposite direct occurrence happening. And people like Elon Musk saying, no, we seriously need to start having more kids. We have to try and help the planet populate. And I suppose there's also a question about which populations culturally are sort of growing and which ones are declining. So famously, Japan's dropping. Europe is in decline in terms of population. And there's some places that are still growing, but that's often associated with relative poverty. And some of those cultures may not necessarily be best equipped to thrive in whatever the future brings with AI and knowledge worker societies and so on. In terms of specific projects, I know that you involved or were involved with some things in the Southern Free State. Can you talk about that? It sort of sounded interesting to me at the time.
No, not at the moment. I'm not at liberty to speak on those things.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. When you talk about the complexity of the ecology, and again, going back to a couple of decades back, seen as a general, we have these very specific problems with the environment growing up, like we have to leave a natural heritage for our kids.
Right.
And it feels to me like a lot of those broader ecological concerns, for instance, get the dolphin out of the tuna and save the whales, stop hunting them.
Yeah.
And I think shark finning is a big issue, attacking an apex predator like that. And what do they call these drag nets?
That's trawling.
Trawling,
yeah.
the ocean floor, and especially with GPS, you can literally run up and down and just make sure you clear everything out. All of these things and environmental pollution, form of effluent into rivers from industrial parks. And it seems like there were a lot of issues, and then most of them kind of disappeared, and everything started focusing in on carbon dioxide as being the big culprits, and then everyone could just ignore the rest. Do you think that, you know what I'm talking about?
I know. I think the other stuff. I think the other stuff tightened up. I think that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you could pollute willy-nilly, and then the regulation started largely in the West. To escape regulations, then they used to have production occur in the East, cheaper labor.
And few environmental regulations. Enforcement of those regulations.
Or even OSHA regulations. And I mean, so you had things like the Bhopal disaster in India in the 80s, where you had the chemical factory leak. So you'd have production happening there. And then later on, I think maybe in the 90s and 2000s, then you started getting a lot more regulation in these developing countries as they were at that time. I think the Simpsons actually did an episode about about India and Brazil and like production and how slack things were. But now those standards have increased because those civilizations or those societies have improved. And now it's going for green. Now it's going for, yes, we can stop polluting. Now we have to bring back what we already polluted. So that's what the CO2 stuff is about: carbon capture, carbon removal from the atmosphere, how to store carbon, and how to ensure that we're just not pumping more and more fumes into the air. And I mean, it is a hype topic. So you're gonna get different ups and downs. You're gonna get different. In 20 years from now, maybe we won't have electric vehicles. Maybe electricity is not the way to go. Maybe hydrogen vehicles will be the status quo. So you're still in the infancy of switching to that after maybe 100 years of burning fuel as a solution.
Yeah, so burning hydrocarbons, right? I wonder about sort of where emphasis go. I don't mean to be too much of a conspiracy theorist, but I do understand that people run on incentives, and there's certain people incentivized to make sure that things run a certain way and not the other way, because profit lies in one direction. And those incentives aren't necessarily lined up with the best ecological future for everyone on the planet or best health of everyone involved. I understand what you're saying, that obviously There's certain regulations in terms of effluent from industrial parks, how things need to be stored, and some of those things have tightened up over time.
Mm.
I just really wonder about this carbon dioxide thing.
Mm.
And at some points, I just accepted, carbon dioxide, because that causes global warming, and because it's a greenhouse gas, so it's going to cause all the warming, and then the ice caps are going to melt, and the sea levels are going to raise, and it's all going to be complete chaos. But then I look at sort of the basics of it. Carbon dioxide is plant food, essentially. So you're using the greenhouse to help the plants grow. And it just feels to me like, for the amount of effort, money, and time being spent on that, like, would it be more smart, for instance, if we focused on, and I know some people are, let's say, on nuclear power, like pebble bed, uranium reactors?
I think they're kind of two separate things. So, like, as you said, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with CO2 being plant food. The simplest solution to climate change is grow more plants and make more green, grow more forest, grow more kelp, grow more microalgae. Anything that's green that consumes CO2, if you grow that at scale, then your deserts grow more cactus. Like, the more plants you grow in the more environments, the more natural CO2 removal mechanism you got. And it's not about like investing massive amounts of money into that. You get certain plants that have a much higher rate of CO2 absorption. Something like the pork bush, which is endemic to the Western Cape, that has 4 times more CO2 absorption than any other plants. And on a daily basis, you might be able to see those effects in your cities where you're getting less smog. Because, like, while the ice caps are melting, living in a city where you have a lot of smog, which we're fortunate not to have in coastal South Africa, but you go to Johannesburg in the wintertime, you do have smog. And go to international cities, and you do have smog. And it becomes a problem when your carbonic acid is forming on the lining of your eye and the inner side of your mouth. And so that would be the realistic, large scale, low tech solution.
Yeah, so you want as little pollution as possible, and you want whatever pollution you've got to be as natural as possible, i.e. not heavy metals and whatever else. Carbon dioxide actually seems like one of the safest byproducts of generating energy, where, like, particulate matter, carbon particulate matter and so on, you can understand, like, that has this direct health effect, right? Yeah, I just wonder. I mean, you were talking about using hydrogen for vehicles. Like, if you use hydrogen or nuclear power, for instance, for shipping, or for wherever we tend to consume the most dirty energy, like, that makes sense to me. Trying to replace it all with, let's say, solar power and wind power, it seems like there's some serious downsides in terms of the broader, as you're saying, the big picture of ecology. Like, if you understand how it all interacts, how we all share this tiny sliver of an atmosphere on the planet, then mining the minerals necessary for solar panels is going to negatively affect certain parts of that system, which will have knock-on effects and ultimately affect everything.
Yeah, exactly. You can't go wrong in plants. And planting is a simple exercise that people have been doing for years. It's not high tech. It's not.
Yeah, and if you have the necessary water, then
Yeah.
no.
And places where it's dry, grow plants that can adapt to those conditions.
Do you think something like some using nuclear power to help desalinate? Because I know there's a high energy inputs on desalination, right? So I often wonder, a place like the Northern Cape, which is quite arid, it's like the Kalahari Desert, and then going into the Karoo, which that's semi-arid.
Yeah,
allegedly, but it's pretty
arid.
It's pretty freaking dry.
Pretty arid.
But if you had a way of just creating or just pulling seawater and pumping massive amounts of water in, I imagine the soil is actually fertile enough. Used to be underwater. You could actually grow massive amounts of food, and all of that food, especially if you're growing it in a regenerative way, then you're helping sequestrate the carbon, and you're generating food.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about science, that you're gonna have people doing that. You're gonna have people from the US to the Gulf to the East working on these technologies in the university groups, competing with each other, publishing papers, and getting to that point. And at some point, that process, the new process they develop, would be state of the art, and that'll keep going. That'll keep going. Maybe by like 2100, you'd actually have your gold standard, your gold standard type desalination that won't change for the next 100 years, and that's a topic in science that's closed. It's like making the light. It's only when something new comes along that you can make a better light, or a better engine, or a better wheel. And
Yeah.
so they are.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to run with your idea of the light.
Mm.
I had the incandescent bulb and served us really well. And then laser LEDs came about. The LED, the little red one, was around for a long time. The laser LED was this great revelation. And you have lighting you can set color on, and it's really cheap because it doesn't use a lot of energy, and you can light up things for much cheaper. I remember having a halogen bulb in my bicycle in probably 1995. And that thing charged batteries, and it was this flimsy little light. And now you put a bunch of LEDs on there, it's amazing what you can do. However, we also see that there seems to be indications that it's not very healthy for people, that the LED light is actually messing with our ability to sleep properly, because it's just blue light all the time, and a whole bunch of other knock-on effects. And some people say the incandescent bulb may actually make a little bit of a comeback because of the health implications. I often wonder, because I understand that if you have honest science, if you have completely honest brokers in science, and you just have these scientists who all compete to try and find the best possible answer for the planet, for the people who live on the planet, for all the existing creatures, for our whole ecology, that's sort of a Shangri-La picture. But the reality is that they're sort of competing interests, right? That you'll have some scientists who will get funding because the kind of conclusions they may come up with may help someone else. Like, what do you think? How do you see the state of science internationally, and what do you think one could do to try and align the motivation, the incentives for people to actually go after the real human problems, as opposed to?
I think it's a bit different now from what it used to be pre-internet. I mean, now, and with things like TikTok and LinkedIn, and there's people that full-time job is just watching for retraction papers. They want to go and find papers where there's nonsense data and make sure that journal is retracting that data and saying that is bad science. We don't want that. So that is a lot more visual nowadays than say what it used to be. Classically, the two examples of where you look at industry suppressing science would be your lead fuels and your tobacco industry. That's been historically the two where there'd be massive scientific components that say, well, these things are good, primarily because,
They were bought off.
they were bought off. Yeah, exactly. Becomes a bit more difficult now because you have a lot more scientists with specific knowledge in specific space. I mean, you think about,
And with access to publishing their findings, right?
yeah,
So someone can go out, like, even if everyone else hates them in the industry, they can go and they have a voice. They can go say, this is BS.
yeah, you can do you can do all sorts of formulas that you can, promote out there. But people are watching. I think there's a lot more. And I think a lot of young people, your students, your graduate students, who can look at a paper and say, well, this data doesn't look right. Just,
So what you're saying is that you feel like the world is, by hook or crook, sort of moving in the direction of
fidelity.
radical transparency.
Yeah,
Because-
fidelity. I think that's the key word, fidelity. Having scientific fidelity, because if you don't have scientific fidelity, then your non-scientific public are not going to believe you. So
Yeah.
when you have your issues like the autism vaccine, for example, where relatively senior people can fall into a trap of not actually reporting, then it becomes a problem. And I think science is mainly what underpins everything, because things like business, I feel, business is a function of science. You need a proper pathway to be able to do business properly. And when people have infidelity in business, then you have these massive collapses, things like the Renos, things like FTX. So from the science side of things, that needs to be the first place where you start fidelity. And having good fidelity, translating from science into business, fidelity is valuable. Because in addition to your research funding, there's also your entire venture capital, private equity, large amounts of money investing in scientific businesses. And
Yeah. And so your sense about this is because of, so your relative chance of getting caught out if you're fucking around with the data becomes more. So even though you might have the money behind you to do something now and you might make great money, your chances of 10 years down the line or 5 years down the line being proven a complete liar and a fraud and destroying your whole reputation and possible future career is something that might weigh more heavily on a scientist today than it would have 15, 20 years ago.
definitely, I'd say definitely. And I think it should be that way, because you need to have transparency in these things. You need to have transparency in what gets funded from the business side of things. Because when you have failure there, what that does is it leads to lack of confidence in the industry. People look at life sciences, look at biotech, and say, well, this is some pie in the sky, witch doctor stuff. Let's go invest in something else. Let's go invest in crypto. Meanwhile, you've got a few failures in the industry, and it's making the industry look bad. So, it's been. I don't think there's actually been a completely stable time in the life sciences biotech industry. It's always going up and down one way or the other, and large boom and bust cycles based on what are the new emerging technologies. Mm, a lot of it is separate on one hand from what goes on in the US because of the large medical aid caps. R&D is heavily inflated. To be able to take a drug to clinical trial and produce it there is quite expensive. So you're looking at, if you start a biotech company in the US, you could raise $50 million to $100 million. And you could raise even more. And then in a few years' time, your company of like 10, 15 people might collapse. You have to retrench everyone, sell everything. So now people are looking at models that are a lot more bespoke for how to start biotech companies. Things like contract research, where if, for example, you and me come up with an idea for a company, we can get a lawyer, try and claim the IP, and contract out the research to get to a point where we actually have some data to be able to raise more funding or to take the product to the market, as opposed to you and me raising a ton of funding and building a lab around us with expensive equipment and hiring tons of people to do that. So we're moving more towards that now, and lack of wasting from. It's nice to have a big fancy biotech, but it's good to be actually able to see the horizon of when the revenue is going to stop, when the next revenue is going to come in, and be able to manage that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Also, I like the idea of things being a little bit more nimble. And so if you're outsourcing some of that research and so on, then it just allows you to be able to pivot more quickly and operate more like a tiny startup that can do whatever it needs to and pull the plug if it needs to, as opposed to becoming bureaucratic before your time is ready and you haven't actually, because then it feels like there's this sunk cost fallacy. So you end up being willing to bribe whoever is bribable and whatever to get this thing to market, even though it's, which I think we've seen in the, specifically in the pharmaceutical industry, where, what is it, so Vioxx and some of these things that they know it's not good, but they've spent all this money. They need to make something back for it. And then sort of some of the ethics just seem to go out the window. And you think that having this sort of smaller, say, more nimble model would allow you, like, what makes it that much more safe aside from not having the massive outlay to start with?
I think that you can pull the plug on your project at any stage. If you go through a series of tests with a few contract research organizations and you're not getting the results, then you can stop.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And in terms, while we're on the idea of pharmaceuticals, because I know a lot of people, and including myself, I sort of felt that there may have been some irregularities around how things were handled during COVID, and a lot of people feel like they want to make medicines that may have had that were generic and fairly cheap, that may have had a major influence. They wanted to make sure those were sidelines to get the EULA out so that they could actually push the vaccine, which is experimental, right? The mRNA, and fully used pseudouridine, which isn't broken down properly and all of this. But it managed to make it out there and make a lot of money, and potentially has already caused and may in the future cause additional negative health benefits. Like, what role do agencies like the FDA and NHI and whatever other kind of international bodies and equivalents there are, how much responsibility should be placed at their feet? I mean, if they're corrupt, is it because they were corruptible in the first place and it's somehow government's job to make sure they're not? Is there regulation to make sure they don't have revolving doors with, for instance, pharmaceutical companies, so that the guy allows something to go through because he knows that in 5 years' time he's going to go walk over, have a cushy job and make lots of money? Like, what do you see as mechanisms that you could try to make this process more honest? Because ultimately, as you were saying, every time something like this happens, and there's enough of a public impression that, oh, you know what, maybe the science doesn't have our best will at heart, or our well-being at heart, then maybe we're all just going to say, fuck the science. But there's lots of science that does mean well and that has honest intentions and fidelity and so on, as you mentioned.
Okay, so
if I made you ruler of the scientists on the planet, what would you do to try and rein some of these overreaches in?
So, I mean, if you're looking at, I mean, there's two separate points here. One is the regulation of pharmaceuticals, which, I mean, we look at the US FDA, South Africa, we have SAHPRA. But if you look internationally, the Chinese FDA actually functions on the same model as the US FDA. Frequently, whoever people who are working for the US FDA will actually go and work for the Chinese FDA after they finished in the US, because it's the level of standard. Like the FDA actually has the level of standard for doing that. Regarding the pandemic, which is the second issue, if you think about all the proper caveats of problem solving, when the house is on fire, we should not be looking for the fire extinguisher. We need to be able to have that in place before the fire kicks off. So once you have the pandemic and everyone's scrambling to get vaccines, it's sort of everyone's trying to do the best they can at that point. And we should ask the question, can we produce a vaccine in 100 days, which is now what CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, is doing, and what they've done. Can we produce vaccines locally so that we don't have to get them flying in on planes? And can we distribute these vaccines to the last mile of healthcare in a rapid fashion? And
visiting the cold chain and all the rest of this.
Yeah. And that is like COVID independent questions. And those are questions that we started asking maybe like 2008 to 2010, and largely driven by the Gates Foundation, largely driven by Bill Gates saying there's going to be another pandemic coming and we don't know what it is. A lot of biologists would feel that we got off somewhat lightly biologically from COVID. If you have an aerosol-borne pathogen that's spreading that rapidly, if it was a bacteria or a drug-resistant bacteria, your mortality rates would have been a lot worse. With a HN type virus,
you say like the permafrost goes, and suddenly there's some kind of bacterium that.
The dangerous one we don't talk about is MDR TB. MDR and XDR TB are vitally dangerous.
First I've heard of these. Tell me about them.
So you have your first line of antibacterial drugs that you use if you have a bacterial infection. If you've been pre-exposed...
Antibiotics.
Okay. If you've been pre-exposed to those antibiotics, your body can develop resistance to them. And the pathogen can develop resistance to that medicine.
Yeah, become antibiotic resistant.
Yeah, bacteria. So then you move to a second line of therapy, which is more hardcore drugs. And then if you're still resistant to that, then you're extremely drug resistant. That means we don't have a drug to treat you. That really becomes dangerous. And when these bacteria develop drug resistance, you don't have anything to treat them, then you're at the highest peril. So we had a MDR, XDR outbreak, I think, in Tugela Ferry, in KZN. That gained international news. And they had to like quarantine the whole place, no one in and out. And that was...
So the relative area affected, number of people, what happened to the people? And what was the rollout of the response? I mean, obviously someone recognizes here's a problem, and then they've got to figure out what are the borders of this problem.
Yeah. And it's when you take the sample to the lab and no drugs that you're testing on it are actually killing the bacteria, and that's when you start having a problem. We have no tool to use against this. So MDR and XDR is one example, but there's many different types of bacteria, and there are more and more antibiotics in the environment. So, for example,
which gives the bacteria an opportunity to actually evolve against that, and that makes them resistant.
Yeah, I think in the top 10 WHO health priorities, there's something called antimicrobial resistance, and this is from things that are getting washed into our soil, washed into our rivers, taken up by the animals, and a lot of it comes from our veterinary value chain of if you
industrial farming. And
when you go to any general dealer on the farms, you'll find you can get antibiotics just to be able to administer. And when the animal excretes, that's going to go into the soil, and we are loading up the environment with antibiotics. So this antimicrobial resistance is
our infinite wisdom.
No, but like we've identified these problems. They aren't like doomsday thing, and people are taking. There are healthcare emergencies. So there are people working specifically full time on sorting these problems out. And you can go read articles every week. Set a Google alert if you're interested in antimicrobial resistance, and you'll see all the articles popping in from the different medical conventions, different conferences, people standing up and speaking passionately about it. And
obviously something like the mRNA platform is pretty much useless against the bacterial attack like that.
I wouldn't say useless, depending on what type of vaccines you can make. You can make vaccines for bacterial infections. So it depends on what the species is, what the pathogen is, and what the interaction is we have with the environment.
Yeah. I'm a little bit I think the rudimentary understanding of the mRNA platform is that it's a really cool idea. But I also, from what I understand, again, I'm not an expert here, but from what I understand, the uridines that you have on an mRNA chain, occasionally, somewhat rarely in nature, you would find that one of those uridines might be a pseudouridine, which doesn't break down easily. And that's what we most recently did, was to actually make all of it pseudouridine, which means it doesn't break down. So the thing goes into a cell, the cell changes, the body recognizes the cell is not what it's supposed to be, destroys the cell. Everything in the cell is destroyed except this chain of pseudouridine that just goes into the next cell and does the same thing again, which seems like that's something you'd want to...
Sounds like a great cancer therapy, because it's killing cells.
Yeah, I mean,
we have a lot of challenges killing cells. Killing cells is one of the most interesting.
But you want to make sure that you kill them discriminately, right? Because okay, sure, one sure way to sort of the AI joke, right? One sure way, if you tell an AI to stop human suffering, is just to kill all the people, and there'll be no human suffering left, right? In the same way for cancer, it's like, okay, well, if you give them enough chemo, the cancer will die, but does the patient get to survive? And so the same with the technology that keeps on, it's like, it indiscriminately bounces to the next cell. Well, if you can make sure that it limits its movement to the cancer cells, then that'd be really cool. If it's not limited to that, then it becomes its own form of cancer.
Yeah, now you have targeted therapy, really, really high forms of targeted therapy. Chemo and surgery was state of the art for good 20, 30 years. And then we started getting immunotherapy around, say, 2011, 2012, when this was largely inhibition molecules like PD-1, PD-L1, and then the cellular therapies like CAR T cells, which are chimeric antigen receptor T cells. And these are repurposed to target specifically your tumor and kill your tumor, being able to recognize that. So you could go for these types of therapies in the US if you have about $250,000 to pay. Otherwise, in South Africa, you can go to Netcare and get surgery or chemo. But eventually,
I could check my piggy bank.
yeah. But just like how when things come out initially, they will get cheaper. But eventually, immunotherapy will become standard of care. And there's a lot more antibody drug conjugates going in, like almost like Lego pieces for targeting and killing cells. And that field is expanding.
And influence of, because I suppose with therapeutics like these, you can, if you've got a human being doing testing, trying out different permutations and things, that'll take you so long. If you want to do modeling, then with, because of AI, because of LLMs and whatever we have available at the moment, I'm sure that you'd be able to model a lot of these more quickly.
Yeah. And I think like this stuff started coming out maybe like in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now we got AI in the conventional sense. Back then it was things like supercomputing and homology modeling, and that's what it'd be called. Now it's called AI.
It's like you try to sell your new software platform to someone a couple of years ago. You just say it's on the blockchain.
Yeah.
And it was like, use the blockchain word. It's like, oh, great. And then so change over like, we use AI. Oh, you have AI. Great.
Yeah.
That is just a little selling point. Yeah. But I'm sure there's some places where it must actually make it a bigger, when you can actually set it to task and say, go look for patterns, go look at 1 million or 10 million or billion different permutations of this, go look for those patterns, and only tell me if there is a recognition of the following things, so I don't have to go look through all of it.
Yeah. And there's a few large computing groups around the world, quite a few in the US. The national one in the US is the Los Alamos laboratories in New Mexico. So that's close to where they did the nuclear test on there.
Well, that's where now Los Alamos from.
Yeah, and they've got like all tons of like supercomputers under the ground, doing all sorts of interesting things there. There's a few big facilities, and these companies as well. Things like Alphabet will have AlphaFold, or they'll have their own different types of contributions that they're making using their software to this. So there's a lot of resources, I think, for biological computing. They're trying to get more in South Africa at the moment, and developing countries. It's an exciting space.
Yeah, I suppose feels to me like you were saying, develop this and make sure we have it in South Africa. Make sure that, it seems to me, you want to make sure that you have the necessary scientific alliances, so that whichever country can do it cheapest gets to host it, because the rest of it's all happening in the cloud, right? Which is code on someone else's computer. But if you put those, for instance, in South Africa, we have a relatively high electricity cost. And it's kind of warm. I imagine if you have a nice cold country with hydroelectricity or whatever, using the cold water and the hydroelectricity, and have sort of better returns to compute than trying to build it in the Kalahari here. Although you might have nice solar power in the Kalahari.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, especially from like the localization and the industrialization point. It's all good and well to want to nationalize and produce locally. And then it's not a geopolitical issue. It's mainly a techno-economic issue. Can you be able to produce at the right economic level to be competitive? Will the labor, electricity, and everything be enough to cover your localized manufacturing for your local market? And then if you think if a business wants to actually be truly successful, it has to export. Then where are you exporting to? Are they not going to buy it from somewhere cheaper? So with localization of industrialization, it's largely about looking at what are the products we can make here, what are the products we can make and sell to ourselves that are in demand, and then what are the products that we can make and sell to our neighbors.
Actually export.
Yeah. And it's tough to be competitive with large manufacturing economies like that. So you have to look at your different niches. And
Yeah. I mean, I wonder about South Africa quite a lot. I think we have a lot going for us, like potential for solar power in the Kalahari, because the sun tends to shine quite often. And we've got certain areas that seem to become stronger, like I think the Western Cape has become stronger. More and more people from all over the world are actually coming here, but also people from the rest of South Africa are moving towards the Western Cape because it seems to sort of promise potential growth and so on, where a lot of other areas in South Africa seems to be in decline, most likely because of political bullshit, this and that, and corruption and whatever else. But what do you think? Because obviously for science in South Africa to do well, like you need a couple of things in place in terms of infrastructure, in terms of respect of intellectual property, which I think in South Africa we tend to have. There are some places in the world that have bigger problems with that. But what do you think South Africa needs to actually put it on more on the map than it currently is in terms of specifically life sciences and developments around that?
I think for all South African science, we probably need a better quaternary infrastructure. We don't have a quaternary infrastructure where your tertiary students can go into. So, for example, if a student studies and goes up to, say, PhD at a university, there's no real placement for them post-PhD. That is on them.
You mean within an educational institution, or you mean within practical industry?
Any sort of vocation and future for them to utilize the skills that they have learned in their bespoke training. Because, if you're training a student to do really, really high-tech biotech stuff, and the only job once they leave university is
Go to the States.
No, sales. Yep. Sales, selling someone else's product that's vending in South Africa. So that is a
Yeah.
It's a stable employment with benefits and a career path that allows that student to
And the guy is knowledgeable enough, smart enough that he can talk the talk and sell the stuff, but he's not actually applying what he learned.
He's not becoming an economic driver for the country. So, and it's not necessarily a South African problem. I think tertiary institutions around the world are having this issue. Countries are having this issue that we're producing graduates year in, year out, continuous amounts of graduates, and we have nowhere to really place them, whether it be a country or a region or a city. So that placement post-graduation is important. There's an institution in Germany next to Lake Constance called IWT. They do this for engineering, where the student comes in, does a master's thesis, works on something, and part of the work that they do is dovetailing into a job for them once they finish. So that means they go into the same field that they studied in, use their bespoke skills to create value for the environment. And so that quaternary infrastructure, I think.
But I mean, that's a statal or parastatal kind of institution, right? That's not. No, it could be private industry, but
I think it's a societal understanding. Yeah, I think it's the IWT is almost like a university, like a private university, probably subsidized by the government. But that's an example, and having a culture around South Africa or developing countries that we're graduating students from universities, they need to be able to go into something after that, and managing that responsibility into bespoke placement. Or
so do you think it might be that we have some legislation in South Africa that might make it make it prohibitive for smaller companies to launch themselves here, and that means that they're not going to create those opportunities for those highly talented, highly qualified, freshly graduated PhDs, for instance?
No, I don't think there's. Yeah, I don't think there's too much international technologies that we can't replicate here or get from people that are willing to subscribe to our policies.
But in terms of business,
no.
And if you're running private business in South Africa, you have to deal with regulatory frameworks and so on that might be prohibitive for, depending on obviously what kind of industry you're in. But I imagine the sciences, what you want is to make sure that you have radical meritocracy at work. You want the best and the brightest, regardless of their race, origin, sex, whatever else, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at different countries and their localization policies, and what our localization policy is, and follow that if we're not happy as a country with that, then we have a right to vote and to change what our policies are through this. But the proactive things we can do is take on quaternary infrastructure, something that is a societal change that we have to make, meaning that private sector should consider what quaternary infrastructure would add value to them, for example. And some of them do. Some of them have, graduate uptake programs from university, suck up people from these programs, largely engineering and business and these types, not so much in life sciences. And then there's also about academic entrepreneurship, that students finishing your PhD can also train themselves in business to launch a business after their PhD. And academic entrepreneurship
that makes sense.
is a very interesting way to be able to overcome these things. I figure that one PhD starting a business that is successful can hire a few thousand people eventually, as compared to non-PhD people starting a business. And that was one of the underpinning factors of the South African PhD program that Desmond Tutu was, I think, chairing many years ago, and trying to push, more graduation of PhDs
into a more entrepreneurial way of thinking.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense. I think it's the same with artists, where you have an artist who's highly talented, but they tend to understand art and creation and so on, and not really understand business. But if you want to be a successful artist, you have to understand the business side. And the same unless you're going to go into full-time academics, or you're going to go work for a really big company, you need to start your own company as a scientist. And that means that you have to know enough about business to at least not be so terrified of it that you won't even try it.
Yeah.
But I think that's really cool. Helps me paint a little bit of a picture of the kind of things that might help us here, or help us in South Africa to develop an environment where the sciences can flourish more than they currently are. Because I think we're heading for interesting times, and you want to make sure, wherever in the world you want to make sure that your country stands a chance of actually finding whatever feat it can to compete as well as it possibly can into the exciting times ahead. So.
Yeah, and going global is, I think, something that's interesting for South African scientists, considering themselves as, part of the global scientific community when launching companies, not just for the South African market, if you have something competitive.
Absolutely, and that's what you're saying. That's the export component, which is ultimately what you're aiming for, because that's how you help grow your own economy and opportunities here and the size of those opportunities. Shivan, I want to sort of jump from that. I think we sort of moving towards the end of this. I find this really interesting, and I've got a couple of things to think about. But I know you're a bit of a fisherman.
Say recreational.
Recreational.
And, like the outdoors, I think, like anything to do with outdoors. The ocean's quite nice.
Yeah. I've seen some pics, you with massive carps and things, and I can see that smile there. It's like, yeah, that's a different smile. Where's your next big fishing expedition, and when is that?
I don't know. I haven't had anything planned for a while. But interesting.
If you get your way.
The West Coast, I like the West Coast. West Coast is quite nice. It's been a long time since I've been
up the West Coast of South Africa.
Yeah, nice and dry. Nice and good up there.
But like Lambert's Bay or further north.
Yeah, that type of region. Yeah.
What do you hope to catch there?
Anything really. Anything.
Whatever bites.
Whatever bites. I mean, I don't like the cold water for edibles. Like cold water edible fish, you get your stook, you get Cape salmon is quite nice, yeah. But I like more freshwater fishing. Large game fishing, monster fish, that sort of thing. Yeah, that is Southeast Asia. It's usually the place for that. And
those are mostly sort of carps and catfish.
Carps, catfish, alligator gar, large Amazonian arapaima, that sort of thing. But have to wear a helmet for those, so they won't knock you out.
Oh, the gar, yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen a video of the guys who teasing it.
This guy's hit in the head. Yeah, out. That's out. Yeah. Yeah. The ancient beasts with the big bony plates inside them, and yeah.
Yeah. I remember in Taichung in Taiwan, there's a botanical garden, and they have sort of little inside area, and they had these two massive gars, Amazonian gars in there.
Mm.
And you just look at them and realize this comes from a different time.
Mm.
This is not a recent advent in evolution. Listen, thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for hosting me. I enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah, and I hope we get to do so again soon.
All right. Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have fun.
Cheers.
Cheers.